Hello, Encounter. How are you doing today? Good morning. Welcome to our daily devotional. Today, I want to bring to you a passage from Genesis chapter 4. I'm going to start reading on verse 9. I'm going to start reading with you on verse 2, kind of like middle of verse 2. Genesis chapter 4. It says, Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Because you do not do what is right. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, Let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? The Lord said, What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse, and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. We're talking a lot about this idea of racial justice, right? That's kind of like the main topic we've been looking at the last few weeks. And this past Sunday, we talked about this idea that, that God's heart burns against injustice, and God's heart breaks whenever there is injustice. People are oppressed, right? And one of the ways in which we kind of like find our way into this conversation is that if we're the people of God, our heart ought to break for the things that break the heart of God. Like, so one of the reasons why we're called to care, right? To get involved in this, because if we love God, if we say that we love God, that we want to follow God, then the natural thing is that we're going to care for the things that God cares about, and racial justice is one of those things. However, there's also another way of looking at this idea, and it's found in this passage. So if you're familiar with the story, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, right? Like the way that this Genesis story begins is, God, in these two different stories, in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, making these very strong affirmations about how much value he's putting in humanity, right? So in Genesis 1, we see this idea that God makes humans in his image and likeness. And then in Genesis chapter 2, it's like God actually forms man from the clay of the ground and then breathes his breath on it, right? So the idea why the humans have dignity and why human life has value in the Genesis story is because God is kind of like associating himself with us by making us in his image and likeness, and by imbuing us with his breath, with his spirit, with our life force. Like basically our life is something that was given to us from God, something that we can just go around taking from each other. And between then and the passage that we read today, what you have is the story of the fall, right? That Adam and Eve rebel against God. They walk away from God. There is separation. There is this breaking of the harmony of the world that we call the shalom of God. And what you have then on chapter 4, which is where we are, is kind of like the effects of that. Like the story is written in such a way that we start seeing what happens when the shalom is broken. And the very first thing that we see is that we start killing each other. And we start killing each other, and that's kind of like the story. But I don't think a lot of times it's explained to us why we kill each other. And in this passage, we actually see it. It's not just that the shalom is broken and sin enters our hearts, and then our next instinct is we're going to start killing people. It's actually a little bit more subtle than that. And you find it in verse 9, right? So Cain kills Abel because he's envious that Abel's offering was accepted. And then on verse 9, it says, Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? God is asking about Abel's life, and God knows what happens to Abel. It's a rhetorical question, but Cain's answer is fascinating because Cain's answer actually, I think, shows us like the beginning of how human relationships have started fragmenting. And it's this idea that Cain says, whatever happens to him is not my problem anymore. Even though they're brothers, it's like, am I my brother's keeper? Like, what is it to me that I need to know where my brother is? In a way, he's kind of like deflecting, right? He's saying, like, I don't know where he is, right? But I think there's something subtle also that the writer is doing. It's kind of like saying, this is actually what happens when sin enters the picture. That our brothers, our sisters, lose their value to us. We become self-centered. We start looking inward, and we stop caring about the people around us. Am I my brother's keeper? What leads Cain to be able to take his own brother's life is that he has somehow detached himself from the connection that he has with his brother. It's not only that sin has disrupted our relationship with God, is that sin has disrupted our connection to one another. So in this story, there's these two brothers, and even that relationship is fractured by sin to the point that Cain can easily kill Abel. Now, I'm telling you this because when Jesus, many years later, introduces, not introduces, but kind of lifts up to its proper place in the biblical story the preeminence of love as kind of like God's fundamental thing, right? Like he's like, if you want to summarize the whole thing, it's about loving God and about loving your neighbor. One of the things that he's doing is kind of like trying to take it back there. He's saying, listen, one of the problems of why the whole thing is broken is because you don't see the people around you as people that you should have any sort of like responsibility for or care for, and these are your brothers. So what he's saying, well, now you have to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus is pointing to fixing that relationship that's broken on Genesis chapter 3 that we see in Genesis chapter 4 play out. That's that brothers are killing one another, and we don't think that we have any sort of responsibility or connection for our brothers and sisters, and we can say, am I my brother's keeper? What is it to me that he's dead right now? What is it to me that I can't find him? And one of the ways in which we enter into this conversation of justice is that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. That if we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves, that means that when something is going wrong with my neighbor, it should concern me. It should move my heart in some way. That's why our hearts are called to break. Because these are the people that God has made in His image as well. And we care for them. And until we get back to that, all this talk about justice is going to be very superficial. Now, this applies obviously very specifically right now in the conversation we're having about racial justice and about how, our black brothers and sisters, and I mean beyond just our black brothers and sisters, because it's not only Christian black brothers and sisters, like, or black neighbors in general, Christian or non-Christian, that they're suffering and they've experienced this, collective disenfranchisement for hundreds of years, and we're kind of like being, awakening to that reality and trying to get involved in it somehow. But I think it's also true of all relationships. The part of the problem of living in our current American society is that our natural instinct is to care about ourselves first, and a lot of times to care about ourselves only. And when we do that, how different are we being from Cain that's saying, am I my brother's keeper? Because Jesus would say, yeah, you kind of are. You're my people. You love me. Well, guess what? You're called to love your neighbor as yourself. And it's not a burden, it's a privilege. Right? Because know that Jesus is saying, now I want you to be, miserable and to be like in grief and despair. No. Jesus is saying, like, listen, like, God is doing this work of justice and repair in the world and fixing things and redeeming things through the gospel, through the message of Jesus, through the power of the Holy Spirit, and you're invited to join. You have skin in the game now because this is the thing that your Father is doing in the world, and you get to be a part of it. It's a privilege that we get to be our brother's keeper, our sister's keeper, that we get to love our neighbors as ourselves. So perhaps for us, the question this morning is, when it really comes down to it, how do I see my relationships around me? Do I see myself primarily just as an independent actor that has no connections and no relationships, no responsibilities for the people around me? Or do we take this command seriously of loving our neighbors as ourselves and care enough that we see ourselves in a way as our brother's keeper, as our sister's keeper, that we see that we get to do something about the brokenness that we see around us in the world? Maybe there's a name for you. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's a friend. It's a family member. There's somebody whose pain you've ignored and isolated yourself from because it's not your problem. That maybe today gets asking, well, where is that person? And what would it look like if we don't answer, am I my brother's keeper, am I my sister's keeper? This is not my problem. But what would it look like if we answer God, yes, I know where they are. I know what's going on. Because I love them. Because I care for them. I invite you to pray with me today when you close your eyes. Dear God, we come before you this morning, convicted by the fact that it's so easy for us to just, isolate ourselves and detach ourselves from the problems of the world and think primarily in terms of us. God, but that's not what we see in the scriptures. What we see in the scriptures is this God who's made us all connected and in this kinship, God, that Jesus is trying to restore and repair. So help us, God, see ourselves as our brother's keeper. See ourselves as our sister's keeper, God. To love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Thank you, Lord. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope we see you tomorrow. Grace and peace.